Alright, let's continue. Now, one thing I forgot to show you in the last video, which is important, is I told you we're going to do the collisions in Blender, not in Unreal, because in Unreal you could run into problems like I did, or not. Maybe you'll find a solution of when this door slides, and because we have components that are crisscrossing the geometries, like the bottom triangle is crisscrossing the geometry, you could have a problem with getting it to have a good collision in Unreal, because it's not going to necessarily import this as a static mesh. This is going to be a skeletal mesh, yet it's going to, when you import a static mesh into Unreal, it's very easy to provide collision for that object. I found that if you're going to do some of the things like this, just set up your collisions in Blender. And in the future, for a lot of your objects, you're going to want to do this, because it just gives you more control, and I think you'll be happier. Even though the Unreal's collision setup is really great, how they have it, they make it pretty easy too in there to set up your collisions. It's just nice to have both options. So to set up your collision in Blender is quite simple. So these basically, we need these two door panels, these two blocks, to have a collision on them, so the character will bump into it right off the bat. So then you can hopefully get your object in there, and there's functionality, like real physical interaction right away, which will be more gratifying, I think, for you. So it's simple. You have your object here. Name your object right here, which I already did. So I named it GeoDoorLeft. Now what you'll want to do, and it is okay if you've already set up your animation and parented this, because I did that and then I thought, geez, can I go ahead and Shift D and make a new door, and will it stay parented? And yes, it will. Thank goodness, because that would have sucked. It would have been fine or just unparented and reparented, but you can have kind of a time machine that way, which is wonderful. So you have your object and you want to make collision, right? So name your object and then go ahead and do a Shift D, which I have already done. Make sure it's in the same exact spot. If this was a very complex geometry, then you would want to decimate the collision. Do not make a collision geometry of like a tree and it's exactly has all the faces that your tree has. You'll want to go over and to your add modifier, and you'll want to decimate that. You can unsubdivide, or you can just collapse it by pulling this in, and find a nice happy place between closeness and low poly. And that will just be kind of like a tweaking the knobs and finding that nice spot. Yet for a simple square, you don't need to worry about decimating anything. It's already low poly. One part of the beauty of doing low poly assets. You don't always have to try and fake everything out so that it can not bog down the computer. So you have your object, name it here, give it a name, and then Shift D, and then keep the exact same name, yet type in UCX_ and leave it in the same position. That will tell Unreal that this is a collision object. It will not render it, and it's kind of wonderful that you can just do it that way. First I didn't even believe it, because I was like, is it really going to be that easy? And I was surprised and happy that it seemed to work good. So, yay that. Let's just do it. And so you geodoor right, Shift D it, and then you'll have name it exactly the same, only UCX underscore. Okay. So once you have that set up, we'll go ahead and then you tested your animation. I didn't go into keyframing. Sorry about that, but if you want an animation tutorial, I'll probably have, there's tons of them on the internet, or I can make some about my personal techniques for a later time. But animating is fairly straightforward. You click on the bone, of course it grabs it, so you can do all things. You can grab, you can rotate. If you're going to rotate and you want it to stay right on the axis, make sure you're in a good viewpoint that where it's not going to be. Once again, when you get on your 45s, you can get some funky results. If you constrain it to an axis, it's fine. Go ahead and hit R and then constrain it to the y-axis. You can go on 45s if you just make sure that you constrain it there. Sometimes I just like to have it in the facing the direction that I'm working with, so then it will automatically do that. I set up the animation too so that it closes automatically. Like I said, in Unreal I wanted a lot of functionality right out of the gate. So, and I wanted this door to kind of have a time delay and then it just kind of seals back on its own. And I wanted to do this in Blender. I didn't want to have to try and use blueprints to command the geometry to do that. So once it's done, make sure, a nice thing that I like to think about is, as far as your scaling, you know, if you have a character in your game, not a bad idea to import him in or her in or it in and take a look, make sure it's the right size. You can always resize it in Unreal, yet it's nicer to have things work how you want right out of the gate. Make sure it's in the center of your scene, somewhat where you want, and make sure there's nothing else in your scene. One thing I'll do is I'll go into Z mode, I'll deselect all, and then sometimes I use the hide tool a lot, so I hit Option H, you know, I hit A. I always check to make sure that there's nothing hidden in there, so you import it and you're like, whoa, there's like a weird object up in the corner. That sucks. Or like a light or a camera. That's why we got rid of our lights and our cameras. We just have our geometry, right? I don't think it's going to import a camera, but sometimes I'll use objects as lights and they'll pop up over there. Real bummer. So just make sure it's clean. And as far as exporting, I'm not a master at all the settings. FBX I go with, and we're going to do the armature and the mesh with the geometry. I found that it likes the smoothing at the edge, so click edge. Seems to give me less warning prompts when I import it, and so we're going to, both being the armature and the mesh are going to be imported. So whatever hierarchy you have, that's pretty much it. So it's, I doubt this is going to work right away. Let's try it. So I'm going to export. Chances are we're going to have normals that need to be flipped. Keep Blender open. Please keep your project open when you import it into Unreal, because chances are it's not going to work right away how you want, and it's just nicer to not have to go and find, especially if you've got a lot of Blender files, to reopen it. Just keep it open so that you can you can jump back and forth. And so let's go into Unreal, and whatever folder you want your meshes to go into, select that. In Unreal, they make it very easy to import. Just import. Find your FBX. If you can. Select it, open it. I'm on a Mac, by the way. Maybe I should do this tutorial on a PC. Most of the stuff is fairly similar. In fact, almost all of it is. So I do not want to necessarily import the materials and the textures. So I leave that off personally. You definitely want to import the animation. So make sure that's clicked. And you can reuse animations later, which is really awesome. I can show you that later. So basically import the mesh, import the skeletal mesh, import the animation. Go. Here it is. So it will import, and it imported very cleanly. So the settings that well, let's see. Spoke too soon. Could not find the bind pose. It will use time 0 as bind pose. Okay, this is an issue that I did come in touch with. So let's go back to Blender. Because I did not do this exactly how Unreal wants this to be done, there's probably a perfect way out there, and by all means take the time, go through all the documentation, and then when you're 10 years later and you find it, you could begin on your asset. But sometimes you just have to roll with it, and because you're under a deadline and you can't necessarily find exactly what you need to give it that perfect import, that perfect rig, that perfect, it's when you do a lot of us are artists, we're used to doing sketches. Sometimes it's the imperfections that we're used to working with, and that's part of sometimes what we like. If we were complete engineers and everything had to be pre-planned and then worked out and just when you see it finally come together, yeah, you're not surprised about anything really, unless something goes wrong, because you've forethought everything. That's wonderful, great forethought, great skills. It's not always going to work that way when you're trying to get something done, and you don't necessarily have 10 years to learn this. So I digress, yet I just want to make a note that sometimes you have to roll with the imperfection for the time, especially while you're designing. You can look it up later to get that perfect import. Yet, with this particular technique I showed you, make sure you set your animation. You don't start it like this, or else the animation will literally start with the door half swung open. Start it at the beginning. Let's do it again, because I had it way over at the end. I'll probably do something funky. So that's why I said keep Blender open simultaneously. So import FBX. Excuse me. Export FBX. Everything's the same. Let's just export it again. Keep Blender open. I don't think it's going to make much of an issue here. For instance, let's just click on the static mesh. Take a look. Alright, so this is an important part. Just first check out your static mesh. see how it's looking. And basically you're looking right now for inverted normals, which I was hoping there was some so I could show you what to do when your normals are inverted. Yet all the normals, what that will mean is your object, it'll look, the hollowness will appear. It will, like this wall will look caved in and you'll see the back side of the other wall. That means you need to flip the normal on this face in Blender. And how to do that, let's open Blender. Let's say this face, you go into edit mode on your object. Make sure you're in the right one. Remember, we did a collision, so you want it to be your actual physical geometry. Tab A. Over here, under shading and UVs, you'll select, say this face didn't show up right. You'll go flip direction. You could also select them all and recalculate, and hopefully that will work, yet that doesn't work sometimes, so you'll probably want to be more precise and just flip the direction. Yet there was no problem this time. But that's what you'll probably have to do. So you check out your mesh and it's looking okay. I like to keep my mesh, see, and look, we have our channels here. This is what I was talking about with the, so we have the channel here, here, and here for these different elements, which correspond to different sections of the art. It's nice to have this. I like to keep the basic mesh though basic. Later in blueprints I like to assign, because blueprints will also allow you to assign these. So I like to keep the basic mesh totally gray. I like to keep it neutral. That's why a lot of these elements in here are gray. Now some of them aren't. This is mostly my experimental. When I'm first beginning a project, I don't keep very well organized. Later I tidy everything up and have everything in its proper folder. At the beginning I'm like I said, I'm impetuous and I just have an idea. If I don't get it out quickly, a lot of times I'll get distracted by a life event. It will go away, you know. So you have to kind of seize your muse and strike while the iron's hot, especially when you got a flow going. So that doesn't always make for the most tidy of filing at the get-go. So let's check out the animation. So it will give you a static mesh, it will give you an animation, and it will give you some physics, and it will give you the skeleton. Let's check out the animation, see if it worked. All right. So it's working. It seems to be happy for the most part. Very good. So you want to check that out. Like I said, if it starts open like that, go back to Blender, make sure your animation is imported with it set on 0 on the timeline. Then you'll probably get a happier import. I'm saying happy a lot. I'm starting to feel like I'm Bob Ross or something. Okay, now let's do this. Let's make our functionality of our door. So okay, in a folder of your liking, right click, blueprint class, and select an actor. We just need an actor. give it a name. So I'm going to name this Geo Door 1. Blueprints are really wonderful because they'll make it so you don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. You can make modular art. It's like a modular artist's dream like designer's dream come true. Very wonderful, and you can keep reusing, basically instantiating the same scene. They can also, blueprints work, in my experience so far, really great if you design them intelligently to work together. So different blueprints talking to other blueprints is very enriching. It can create a very rewarding game environment when you do it correctly. Sometimes when you do it incorrectly, it will create something rewarding. Those happy accidents. Anyway, Blake's scene and blueprints, and add component. Now you can add normally a static mesh, but we're going to add a skeletal mesh. I'm somewhat slurring this morning. I'm thinking like I've been fighting a cold, so my energy level must be terrible. Skeletal mesh. Give it a name. You'll want to give it a unique name because later you can call on these names for certain functionality that you want, and it's better if it has a name that you recognize. So let's geo wall _1, because that it can act as a variable later, and you can pull it in to call on it. Go over to your mesh, and it will give you your list of all the ones that fit that bill. I believe it's this one. Yay! So it came in. Now at this point is the time when I like to apply the vertexes that we set up. So you can make your materials in Unreal, and then use them at this time to create custom looking design, not designs, but materials, like if they're glowing or if they're reflective. Let's go with a purple. A black. Instead of solid black, I set up a dark gray. I'm going to try that out. And for the other element, I'm going to keep, I already made these materials earlier, and now I'm using them with the vertexes. Sometimes when you assign a new material, it take a while. Now is the time to add a component. We're going to add a box collision. Box collisions, very useful for so many different things. And it is good to give this a unique name too, because you can call on these little buggers and have them do unique functionality, and you'll want to be able to know, okay, what little monster was I dealing with? And you might have like 100 different orcs, but you really want all your orcs to have different names, you know, like Ragwood and, you know, Toadhead. Each one wants to have its own name, so you can call it specifically later if you want it to mutate. Maybe you want to like cast a spell and then Raghead turns into like a mushroom. Well, you need in blueprints or in C++ to have its name, so you can do cool things like that. So I'm going to call this hit geo door. Hit geo door 1. Good enough. Not the best name, yet when you're doing things real time on the fly like this, you'd be surprised at how less efficient you become as you're trying to talk and work at the same time. These 3 tools up here is where you can scale, rotate, and move your objects. So make this hitbox. This hitbox will not be visible in your game. It's really, yeah, sometimes it's this selection tool. That's why I like to do some things in Blender. Unreal, like this blueprint interface is very wonderful. Yet sometimes things go a little faster if you set as much as you can up in Blender. So enlarge this box to basically encompass the area that you want for when the character enters this box, it activates whatever function you want it to activate. We want it to open a door. I want it to be somewhat of a motion sensor door, at least at this point. Might change that later, but right now I'm going to keep it simple so that when you get close to the door, it starts opening up for you. And I don't want you to have to like ram your face into the door for it to open. When you're testing things, don't spend too much time. First, just see if it works before you get all refined with every little detail, because a lot of times you'll have to go back. Sometimes, much to your anguish, you'll have to start over from scratch after going and doing something else because you just give up for about 3 hours. Okay, so you're back and we have the door. If you ever get lost, you can select on your object, just like in Blender. If you select a component on your object and then hit the period key, it will find it for you. In Unreal, usually you can select it and hit F and it will track it for you. Works most of the time. Sometimes it seems to get confused. So with the hitbox selected, you have I should have tested to see if our collision worked right out of the box, but I guess we'll just check after we did some work. Not the best practice. First, after you first got that static mesh in there, go ahead and pull it into the scene. Like, let's compile and save this. I'm going to show you because right now you'd be doing things, if that didn't work, right now you'd be doing things that you probably don't need to be even worrying about right at the moment. So let's go back to the static meshes. Let's find it. Let's find just its mesh, or better yet, let's find its animation. So here's the static mesh. You can click and drag its animation right in there. Pull it to somewhere on the scene. What do they say? Test early and test often. It's true. Just do it. Just test it. If you can find it. Where did I put it? Okay. Where are you? There you are. See what I told you earlier with resizing your stuff? Looks like I didn't follow my own advice, because look how that's too small. So it's okay, you can resize your stuff in Unreal, yet I really should have taken this skeletal mesh, this character, pulled it into Blender, and checked my scale on the object I was making in Blender. So now, because I didn't have the forethought, or I was impetuous again, that I am going to have to, I don't have to go back, I'm just going to work with the imperfections. Isn't that what we do with life so much? So, yeah, best practice is, because if someone else is working with your asset, it's going to like tweak their brain a little bit, probably that they have to mess with it a little bit to get it right to scale. So if you're making it for a client or something, do it so that it's plug and play as much as you can. It will make them happy when they think about you. So we've got a tiny little munchkin door. That's fine. So I'm trying to bump the character into it, and the character is stopping. So the collision seems to be there. Let's see if we can. It seems okay. Reality check. I'm gonna jump out. I'm gonna scale it up a little bit. We might have a problem. This is why it's good to test before you get too crazy. But I always get ahead of myself, because the way my brain works, it's thinking in the future more than it's thinking in the present. Yoda would be very unhappy with me. Okay. Make it a little bit bigger. Probably didn't make it big enough. Yep. So we can go through. The collision is working. That's all we needed to do. We needed to make sure that that worked first. And it did. Yay. So it works. Get rid of it from our scene. Delete. Let's go back to our blueprint. So that's what you best practice to do before you start ripping into your blueprint. So we find it again. I think I named it Geodor1. And here we go. We have the hitbox selected, and let's set it to overlap all dynamic. Will probably work well for what our need is, because we need basically the character comes into this invisible box, and it will send a signal to, and we want the animation to play. So open the doors. We already set all the physical contact of the door, so that will work on its own, which is nice. Like I said before, had a problem with, because this is the borderlands between a skeletal mesh of a character and the skeletal mesh of more of a stagnant object. So the collision, you notice when you make a character, sometimes there'll just be a collision capsule that goes over the character. Well, what if the character's arms could fly off its body and go in different directions, which is weird, but it's a little bit more complicated to set up collision capsules for the weird flying arms. So that would be confusing in Unreal. It'd be like, okay, so now how do we use the capsule because this arm now is flying through a wall? Well, you'd have to do something more creative, more custom, which is what we set up in Blender. We went ahead and did the collisions so we don't have to try and make a collision box. Like we'd add a component, we'd add a box, we'd set its visibility probably to 0, or we'd add some custom collision, and then we would try and parent it to the wall, but then the wall opens left and right, splits in half, so then we got 2 boxes that are doing simultaneous things. Totally doable, I bet. I'm sure there's an Unreal person that knows exactly how to do that, and that will be his go-to technique. When you're just going with it and you don't know everything, use your go-to techniques, and you'll learn, and you'll be more refined. This worked, and I liked it because I was able to do a lot of it in Blender. So let's set it up. Make sure that it's selected, and then you have these events that you can do. These events are awesome. You can try and this one on event begin overlap. Let's use this one. So just hit plus. It will bring you over into the event graph. It'll already give you a node. That's the great thing about this node-based programming, is it's really good to test ideas. Makes it easier to get interactivity in your game quicker, so you can just see if it's fun before you spend a lot of time optimizing it in code. So what do we want to do here? We want to, so when the character enters, what I'm going to do is probably really crude, but it's going to work. I'm going to go play animation. It's kind of nice. It already knew this is Unreal's fairly intelligently designed. It already knew where I was going with this. So it knows it wants to use GeoWall1, and it wants to play an animation on it. So new animation to play, select the asset, click it, and right here we will have, here we go. Here's our basic animation. Now if this was even more complicated, like maybe it was a little dude that got angry and he had some like hatchets and he was like going to swing them around at you, you'd probably want an animation montage. You're not just going to do like a right out of the gate animation that you set up. You're going to have different reactivity because he's a little dude with those, he has his own little mind, and you want to make him more sophisticated. So, but for, like I said, the borderland between static meshes and full-on character, this is adequate, I think. It's really that simple, and it's just like the 2-step, right? It's almost embarrassingly simple. I'm probably speaking too soon. Let's check it out. So compile and save. I believe this is what I've done before. And we're going to pull our door in again, maybe in a little bit, not so close to that wall. So I'm just going to click and drag it into the scene. This is our blueprint. I'm going to pump up the volume on its size. hit F, get you a nice view. All right. So now it's like plug and play, right? It's the door I did earlier. It's working. And here's the door that we're going to test. Oh yay. And success. There you go, guys. So it's might not be someone else's go-to technique, yet this worked, right? We've got a door that's got a little bit more complex animation, and it works. The collision's already handled within Blender, so it's kind of simplified that process for us. I think some of you might really enjoy that. Now, I hope you get creative and come up with your own awesome ideas, and I look forward to seeing your creativity and your ingenuity out there. Okay.